Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. My name is Nick Palavita. I'll be your moderator for today's program. And today's program, we're going to discuss the debate. This is the Joe Biden, Donald Trump debate. Who won this debate? Took place last week, and we're going to be broadcasting this throughout the week. But with that, we're going to get opinion of the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. Hopefully, he had his questions answered during this debate, or whether or not they were even asked. So with that, we're going to bring in David Walker to see if he can give us some insights of who won this debate. David, who's the winner?
The bottom line is, in my view, is Trump won by default. I think it became blatantly apparent that President Biden has a serious mental acuity issue. And whether or not he has the energy to be able to continue to serve as president for another term. My concern is that it's one thing to debate whether or not he's okay today, and my general view is that he ought to serve out his term. But I think, in my opinion, there's no question that he is not in a position to serve another 4 years as president of the United States, CEO of the United States, and commander-in-chief of our military forces. He's a good person. He's had a lifelong objective to become president of the United States. He achieved that objective. He's done a number of things as president that he can point to. But the risk to our country is too great to be able to have him serve another 4 years as president. You know as well as I do that 70% of Americans don't really want Trump or Biden, but unfortunately the political parties have put us in this situation, and No Labels decided not to run a third candidate, which I continue to believe was a mistake, but we are where we are. And so a few other comments. Both candidates made false statements. Trump made false statements more than Biden did, but they both made false statements. Both of them said, this is the best, you're the worst, or whatever. But by definition, when somebody says the best or the worst, I tune them out. My mama taught me a long time ago, you don't use those types of words. And what frustrates me with Trump is if he just used the facts, if he just stated the facts in many cases are in his favor, whether you're talking about inflation, whether you're talking about unemployment, whether you're talking about the border, whether you're talking about international conflicts. The facts are in his favor in many cases, but he wants to use this terminology, well, it was never better, it was the best, or he's the worst, or what. I mean, I think that's totally inappropriate. I thought the low point was probably when they were talking about their golf handicaps. I just started playing golf about 2.5 years ago, and believe me, my handicap's a lot higher than theirs is. And one of the things that really surprised me about it is Trump actually said twice during that, let's not be juvenile, which I agree with, but secondly, I was shocked that Trump said that, if you will. And last thing is, which is the most important, I did send 5 questions to CNN. They did ask 2 of them, basically, in substance, not the exact same words. And that is, what are you going to do to put our finances in order? And what are you going to do to save Social Security? They both flunked that. They did not have credible answers to that question. And, we deserve credible answers to that question. The real question is President Biden going to stay in the race? And if not, who's going to end up being the Democratic nominee? And then where do we go from here with regard to debates? If Biden stays in, is he going to debate again? If he doesn't stay in, obviously we're going to need more debates. The Democrats in particular would need more debates because they would be running somebody who hasn't had the visibility, obviously, that the president has. So those are my overview comments. And Nick, actually, I'd be interested in your thoughts too.
Well, the thing is, I like to get the thoughts of others, then I'll jump in. And we do have some others joining us. We have Rick Rosner coming in from Los Angeles, and we also have from Australia Shaquille Latmer, plus the head of a group called Turning Point down in
Oh, yeah.
Australia. Are you familiar with that? This is the first I heard of it. I guess
I know of Turning
Point
USA. I don't know Turning Point Australia.
Well, apparently,
So
Turning Point
Australia, Dave, Turning Point Australia is one of the organisations that I work with. This is the head, young man, 27 years old, young man who is the head of Turning Point Australia. Obviously, there are different policies because we're different countries, but we're part of a similar viewpoint. A couple of things I'd like to say to you, Dave. One, you can take all the credit for the CNN hosts, which I actually think did a very good job.
I do too.
They did ask those questions, and you're absolutely correct. Neither of the candidates gave a proper answer. But I have to tell you, Dave, I've been talking to all my conservative friends, and we're very surprised that you think that Trump won the debate. We all thought that Biden did a magnificent job. So I was trying to give a straight face when I said that. We all think that Biden did a magnificent job. Here's what we take away from it, though, from around the world. There wasn't really anybody that I know of that was surprised, left wing, right wing, or otherwise. Nobody was surprised in Biden's performance. So when we started to see, CNN and MSNBC panelists freaking out and being totally shocked, it was like, how are you shocked? It's one thing that you've gaslit all of us, but have you actually gaslit yourselves? Like when Van Jones was almost in tears. Are you guys serious? Like the whole world knows that Joe Biden cannot do anything. He can't handle anything, that he's gone. We all know that. How are these people surprised?
Well, they believe some of the things that they were told. And, frankly, I think really what you have to ask yourself is the person who's the closest to the president and his most trusted advisor is Jill Biden. To me, I think she's got to think very seriously, and the family has to think very seriously about what they counsel him to do. I mean, he has given over 50 years to this country. He's clearly in line. He deserves a decent retirement.
We brought this up on the other show.
Hold on 1 second. I agree with you that the moderators, I thought, did a good job with one big footnote. Where the heck were the fact checkers? Where were the fact?
Well, that was agreed on before the two candidates came up. But I just want to give you an international perspective.
Yeah.
All of the Western world, but especially the Five Eyes countries, rely on the United States. We're actually quite scared, or I shouldn't say scared, but we're worried, because what the United States has allowed to happen at the highest offices, at the executive branch level, is they have allowed incompetence to be there for the sake of your domestic politics. We rely on the United States, and I know, Dave, you know how much I respect the United States, but with everything that we saw, we're worried. What happens even in the next 5 months? Like, we're really worried about what you guys are doing. And the United States really needs to, from an international perspective, you guys need to sort this out. You guys need to stop playing petty politics at a domestic level and recognize that the privilege that you have with the petrodollar, by being the world's reserve currency, etc., comes with some obligations to the rest of the countries in the world.
No, I totally agree with that, and it's at risk. We already know that there are forces that are moving away from the U.S. dollar as the primary reserve currency. We've seen that Saudi Arabia is now accepting payment in alternative currencies. I don't think the United States will lose reserve currency status, but I think it'll lose market share, if you will. Our political system is broken. You have to understand, let's put this in context. What we basically have for the first time in over 100 years is we have two incumbents running for president. Both of them have been president. Historically, in our system, rightly or wrongly, incumbents are presumed to be the party's nominee, absent something extraordinary. And that's what's happened here. In other words, Biden had said that he was going to be a bridge to the future. He was going to be a transitional candidate. So everybody assumed he was only going to have one term. The problem is his vice president is less capable than he is. And therefore, and he's the only person who's ever beaten Trump. Trump, on the other hand, lost his reelection bid. But he said he wanted to run again, and so therefore he's kind of the incumbent. We in the United States right now have a republic, which, as you know, is a representative democracy, that in my view is not representative of nor responsive to the general public. I've already mentioned that 70% of Americans don't want either one of these. All right. And that's why I was part of the No Labels effort to try to come up with a viable third option. And I've already commented on that. So
Dave, I'm going to do something which I think is going to completely blow your mind. So please stay seated for this.
I am.
Okay. All right. Now, normally, because I'm normally the youngest person here, I normally am the petulant child that tries to challenge you, even though we agree on like 90, 95% of everything. But I'm going to do something that's going to blow your mind. I'm going to shut up for a few minutes because I would really like for the 27-year-old
I would too.
head of Turning Point Australia to please comment on what you think about not just the debate, but also the incredible levels of debt and the incredible levels of instability in the US and how you feel about that as it applies to Australia and how you feel about it in the United States. This is Joel Jamal. I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, no,
Sit
look,
down, Dave.
yeah.
I'm going to shut up.
No, look, guys, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I normally am in my studio in the city, but no, look, I was graciously invited on by Shaquille, and he's been a great supporter of the stuff that I've been doing. But yes, I am with Turning Point Australia. We are associated with Charlie Kirk. We're very good friends with Nigel Farage, who introduced us to Charlie Kirk, who's doing phenomenal stuff in the UK. But yeah, look, I think people like Nigel Farage have really quite articulated the international allies version of our feeling after that debate. We're really worried about the instability around the world. I think that's why we signed AUKUS, which was about technology sharing between Australia, America, and the UK. But yeah, I saw Dave nodding his head, but with regards to AUKUS, if you guys don't know, it's an agreement where Australia is essentially has the ingenuity of America as well as the UK and the technology sharing that we have as being allied countries, so that we can work more collaboratively, so that we can. It's another vector in which we can combat the CCP, especially in the Pacific region. And we're also seeing other entities like the Quad, being America, India, and Japan and Australia. We're very much worried about the next 4 months. I do believe it was Ben Shapiro from the Daily Wire. He was making the point that we could be seeing the next 4 months being the most dangerous period of time for the America as a country, because we've got this this president leading us for the next 4 months, and it's very unstable with regards to the way he conducted himself on stage. I'll make note to Donald Trump when he was making a point. He didn't let the moderators cut him off. He continued his point until he finished it. Whereas Joe Biden, the moderators might partially interrupt him during it, but he looked very weak during it. I think America, in order for America to fly as a great eagle in the sky as it once did, it needs two wings, being the Democrats and the Republicans fielding strong candidates so that we can have a really good debate going on in America. But with regards to the economics of what's going on, the whole West is facing some severe debt problems after COVID, especially Australia. We're facing $1 trillion debt, which is nothing compared to America being 22 times smaller, but it's massive for Australia per capita. Look, the debate. I'm really hoping that the Democrats can field someone a bit stronger that can articulate the Democrat side of things, so that we can get a better quality of debate in America. And the last thing I'll say is, it was our former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson who was in charge of Australia during 9/11. because our prime minister was in the USA at the time. He said, "You don't get good policy out of a bad public debate." I really fear and I mourn for America because I see the deterioration of the statesmanly debate, the battle of ideas. We're not seeing that anymore. Instead, we're resorting to, what level of handicap club, you might use with regards to golfing. We're in a really tough time right now, and our enemies are at the door waiting to jump in.
Well, I appreciate your comments. And one of the other things that happened that same night, and then we'll go to Rick, is on X, which was formerly known as Twitter, there was, I think, about 20 million people plus that watched a simultaneous debate of Trump and Biden and RFK Jr. And if you haven't seen that, you ought to take a look at it. I'm sure it's still out there. I watched it. It was interesting. John Stossel was the moderator, and they allowed the regular debate to show, and then they put it on pause, and then they asked RFK the same question. It's worth taking a look at. Now, the question is, will RFK qualify for the next debate, and will there be a next debate? And there are other candidates that are running other than Biden and Trump, but the only one that has double-digit percentages right now is RFK. You've got West and you've got Stein. And by the way, there is going to be a debate for the second-tier candidates on July 12th in Vegas. I'm going to make about 2 minutes worth of comments before that debate, and there's going to be another debate for those candidates on September 5th in LA, and I'm going to be one of the co-moderators. And so I can assure you that there will be substantive questions asked. The frustration is we need the major candidates to be part of this too. It's unlikely, but with prayer, anything is possible. So, but thank you for your comments. And I share you. Now keep in mind, and I'm saying this in humor, if the problem occurs between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern time, we're okay. The problem is, a vast majority of the day doesn't occur between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., especially in parts of the world. Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
So a couple things. One is I find RFK completely unsuitable. His ticket, he and his VP, zero experience holding elected office. And he's a sexual predator. He's a former heroin addict. I mean, anyway, but with the discussion among the Democrats and among Democratic leadership is whether to replace Biden. And, nobody polls as well as Biden, at least according to the polls taken immediately after the debate. So what needs to be found out over the next few weeks is whether Biden is really like he was during the debate every day after, at night. We don't know yet. We saw one bad debate where he spoke for about 35 minutes out of 90 minutes. And we luckily, we have 4 months to go, and we have 7 before the election and 7 weeks to go before the Democrats have to officially nominate somebody. So we have time to get more information about how Biden actually is, whether, it's justified to have him step aside and put somebody in who likely gives Trump a 2 percentage point advantage relative to Biden.
Well, Rick, a couple things. One, I would respectfully suggest that you can't just look at how Biden is today. You have to project forward 4.5 years because he is running for another 4-year term. And I'll speak for myself. There is no way that I could vote for Biden because he's not in shape to be president of the United States and commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. Now, I would like to have a viable third option. We don't have a viable third option. As you know, I'm not a Trump fan, okay? And I've got serious problems with regard to Trump, but he doesn't have a mental acuity issue. He's got a truthfulness issue, if you will, but then I got a lot of politicians do. And so I think, no matter how he looks a week from now, a month from now, that's never going away. And I don't think he's going to get past that, but that's my view. Mark, had your hand.
Sorry, after Mark, I'd like to
A quick question for Dave, because it's something that I've been hearing a lot lately, and I just wanted to take your take on this and everything, because it seems that Trump, surprisingly, is getting a lot of uptick in communities that were traditionally Democratic, and part of that may be because of the poor results of the debate, but it was even before that debate took place. So I just wanted your take on that, because whether we talk about labor, and I'm talking about labor in the sense of unions and all along those lines, because I know labor can have a different meaning to different parts of the world and everything, but I'm talking about labor in the sense of unions, or whether we're talking about the African-American or the Hispanic vote, it does seem that Trump is polling stronger than any Republican has in the past. But I was just wondering your take on that, because it does seem like there are a number of core groups to the Democratic coalition that are starting to, I won't say totally slip away, but at least part of their base is slipping away. And I was just wondering your take on that.
Well, I think there are several reasons. One, inflation, real wages. Inflation's worse, although it's come down significantly, and one has to recognize that. But core inflation has gone up 20% over the last 3.5 years. Inflation for things like food, gas, insurance, how the average mortgage costs have gone up much more than that. All right. And so everybody's affected by that, no matter what your age, race, religion, color, creed, whatever. Secondly, the border, and the fact that we've had millions of people come in, there's an economic aspect of that. Okay. There's a national security aspect of that. There's a crime aspect of that. I think the other thing that is happening is that, Trump did do a number of things that help some of the disadvantaged communities, with regard to enterprise zones, with regard to additional investments for historically Black colleges and universities. I think some people believe that, I'm not saying necessarily my view, but I think some people believe that he's not being treated fairly by the judicial system. And by the way, this morning, the Supreme Court did come down with a ruling on immunity, and they said that the president has total immunity for official acts, doesn't have any immunity for things that aren't official acts. The real question is, what's an official act? And so that means it's going to have to go back to the lower courts for fact finding, if you will. And that means it's likely not to be adjudicated before the election. And then the last thing I would say is that Trump is actually trying to reach out to some of these communities that historically Republicans have not. Historically, Republicans have just written them off. And that's a mistake, because if you're elected as president of the United States, you're elected as president of the United States for all the people. All right. And so I think those are some of the reasons why you're seeing that. We'll see what happens as a result of the debate. I just think that, mental acuity is of critical importance. I mean, just of critical importance.
Just a follow-up question.
Dave, I'd like to just ask you a couple of things, or say a couple of things. If you have come to terms, if you are okay, and you've come to terms with the fact that I shut it up for a few minutes.
I was shot, and it is a historic moment. I might.
It is. Well, yeah, we're having lots of historic moments in politics at the moment. I just want to bring a couple of things up here. So, firstly, you talked about having, third parties or smaller parties, and I've often asked you in previous shows when we've talked about healthcare, or we've talked about social security, we've talked about other things. Does the US look at what has happened in other countries? So obviously from Australia, and as you guys all know, I'm British as well, we have multiple parties, but that makes elections a little bit more complicated, because what major political parties have to do is they have to form coalitions with smaller parties. And one of the complaints about that is that smaller parties that don't actually garner very much of the vote have a disproportionate amount of sway over what governments should do. Now, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? There's no way to determine that, but I'd love to hear what you think that would result if that happened in the United States. The second thing
Okay,
that I'd like to just bring up
sure.
is you've got this contentious time in the United States, but I don't think the United States pays very much attention to what the rest of the world thinks. Commentators always say the whole world is watching, but I don't think that your political elites ever actually pay attention to what international people actually think and whether we're worried or we're not worried. And I'd just love to get your feedback on that if I can.
Well, first, as you know, I'm a student of history, and I believe very strongly that we need to learn from history and we need to learn from others. And while the United States is undoubtedly a superpower with global economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural impact, there's a tendency in the United States for people to think, for especially politicians to think that since we're the leading superpower, that we must be highly rated in everything. And in reality, that's not true. We're rated below average in a number of things, including K through 12 education results, including healthcare outcomes, and I could go on, but I won't. So I'm a strong believer that you have to look at how are you doing, how are you trending, how do you compare to others, but not everybody in the U.S. is that way. I think there has been a tendency in recent years to focus more domestically rather than recognizing what our role is in the world and the fact that we have increasing interdependency and interconnectivity, and we need alliances now more than ever for lots of different reasons.
Can you recognise though why your allies, like Australia, you're our most important ally from Australia, and I'm not speaking on behalf of Australia. This is just my opinion.
Sure,
Can you understand why people here might feel some resentment towards the United States when we have fought in every single war or battle you guys have had since our federation, and we see you guys, in our opinions, destroying yourselves, and we have to support you?
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about at a governmental level, but as at a citizenry level, I think there is a growing amount of resentment for the disorder that there is in the highest levels of your government.
I think there are parallels between how people are viewing some of these things domestically and internationally, but from a different perspective. Let me clarify what I'm saying. We were sold a bill of goods. The American people were sold a bill of goods about Biden. Oh, he's great, no problem, and people could speak for themselves. I tell people, look, Americans have eyes, ears, and brains. All right. And we saw definitively what kind of shape he's really in. And I don't buy what was just a bad night. I mean, that was not the issue. Okay. And so, and I can see how people internationally would feel badly that, you're our allies, you're relying upon us, and our system seems to be dysfunctional. But let me come back to your question. First, right now, we have two major political parties, or as our founders would have called them, factions. All right. And by the way, they were against factions because they were concerned that the duty of loyalty to faction might trump the duty of loyalty to country. Can you imagine that? Okay.
But we're also against democracy, I might point out. But please continue.
The truth is, I understand what you're saying about a parliamentary system. Okay. But right now, what we have is, while we don't have a parliamentary system, we do have a number of wingnuts on the right and wingnuts on the left that are within the two parties, but who have a disproportional influence on what those parties do because the margins between the two parties are so close, right? And so you can get a small faction of individuals within your own party that have a disproportionate impact, and that's what we're seeing right now. America is built on many things, but one of the things that we're built on is choice and competition. All right, and there's no question that we now have, in my view, a republic which is not representative of and responsive to the general public. That's one of the reasons why almost 50% of registered voters are now independents, like myself. And the other two parties are losing market share. So in addition to making policy reforms, both domestic and international policy reforms, we need political reforms to revitalize our democracy and to make it more representative and responsive to the public. We need things like integrated and open primaries where people like independents can vote in the primary, and where you don't have the primaries decided by a small percentage of people who tend to be more activist in the party, who tend to be more extreme within the party. Okay, we need to have.
But Dave, on that point specifically, I actually agree with you. However, if you have open primaries, does that not leave it open to some abuse? If I'm a Republican, put it in Australian terms, if I'm a Liberal, which I am, and I decide that it's an open primary, so I'm going to go to a Labor Party a primary and then try to put somebody in there that I prefer over the Labor Party candidate, does that not open up for abuse? And specifically, as an example for you guys, with Nikki Haley, when there was a heap of independents and Democrats that went and voted for her. She didn't win, but voted for her over Donald Trump, even though they would never have actually voted for her in the general election. And they said that after they had voted. Does that not open you up to an incredible abuse?
Well, two things. One, the parties can endorse candidates. So if you have an open primary, an integrated open primary, the parties can still endorse candidates, if you will. So it's not a total free-for-all. Secondly, there's two kinds of primaries. Closed, which is, I think, a big part of our problem. Semi-open. Semi-open says if you're a Republican, you can be a Republican or an independent and vote in it. Or totally open, all right? What we have now, I think, is the worst of all worlds. We have closed. Now, some states, including mine, is a semi-open primary. And by that, I mean I'm an independent. So I can choose whether I want to vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican. I can't vote in both, but I can choose. And I do that. Sometimes I'll vote in the Republican, most of the time. Sometimes I'll vote in the Democrat. Where's the action? No. Where's the action? Okay. And what's most important? You have to choose in each election. In California, they have integrated open primaries to the point where you could have two Republicans running off for the general or two Democrats running off for the general. But let's put it this way. Right now, the only way an independent has a chance to get elected is if they're super wealthy and super well known. On the other hand, if you make some political reforms, it forces the candidates to move more towards the middle, and it gives a chance for independence. Would
you support
12-year term?
Would you support the sort of things that we have here in relation to major political issues, gay marriage, the voice, those sorts of things? We have national referendums. Would you support that type of thing in the United States? And to Kimberly's comment, because I love you so much, Kimberly, and I believe that women want the opposite of what they are. That's why I'm a right-wing nut.
Well, the answer is we do not have initiative and referendum at the federal level under our Constitution. It would take,
but would you support having one if you could?
Intellectually, I would. Okay, intellectually, I would. It would take a constitutional amendment. I'm fighting right now for a constitutional amendment for fiscal responsibility to limit how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on. And there's two ways to ratify an amendment. The one that I'm arguing for is the closest thing to a referendum, and it would be conventions of citizens in the states pledged to vote for or against. That's the closest thing we have in our system to a referendum. It's not initiative, but it's referendum, and that's what I think. That's what I'm fighting for. Rick, and then Mark.
All right. So, Dave, you said that Trump doesn't have mental acuity issues. We don't know,
I didn't say that, but
Trump says a bunch of nonsense, but he's always said a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
He says some words that aren't words, and he gets people's names wrong. But every grandma or grandpa in the land, calls one grandkid by the other grandkid's name. We all know. That's thing one. Thing two is, it's not just the president, it's the people around him. So Trump tended to pick incompetence, and the competent people tended to get frustrated with Trump and leave. And Biden has picked competent people, except letting him get up there and look like pounded shit during the debate shows that the people around Biden might suck too.
Well, I think the Trump that you're seeing now is not the same Trump that you saw in 2020. Okay. He's running a more professional campaign. Frankly, I think the format for the debate helped him by muting the microphones and not allowing him to be able to interrupt the president, which he did frequently the last time. And look, let me just restate. I don't like our options. I don't like either options. These individuals are very different. And so I don't try to say that Trump doesn't have a problem with regard to, mental capacity. But he clearly doesn't have as big a problem as Biden does. I'm not saying that Biden doesn't have a problem not telling the truth. He does have a problem not telling the truth, but maybe not as big as Trump's. Okay. But then again, we have to remember the old saying, you know how you can tell when a politician's not telling you the truth? Their lips move. Mark, next, please.
Yeah, I had a question. It kind of comes back to what Shaquille was asking, and then I had a question as to, because I was talking to Shaquille on our other show about an October surprise, but I was just wondering from your standpoint, is there any possibility at all that at some point in our United States that we could have what has happened here in North Carolina several times, which is that there could be a Democrat and a Republican, but one being the president, the other being the vice president? And is that ever going to happen, and could it ever happen? And then with the October surprise, I was wondering, because I've even read some commentaries, including from some conservative people, that are talking about this notion, because there are some people that thought that the pandemic was a plandemic, and they are fearful that it could be something like that could happen again as we get closer to the election. So I was just wondering, is that a fear that you have, that there could be something like health emergency of some sort that could
so that could never happen. So that could never happen in Australia or the UK or New Zealand.
I didn't say
you
that.
guys have such a drastically different political system to ours. A lot of people have rung me over the weekend and sent me text messages asking, like what's happening in the US? Can Joe Biden be replaced? And all that sort of stuff. Are they going to bypass Kamala Harris? That sort of stuff. And I said something which is ridiculous. It's never ever going to happen. But I'll just tell you what I said. I've tended to find in Western countries outside the US that if you want something done, it has to be done by the party that wouldn't ordinarily support it. If you want, for example, more liberal abortion policies, that won't be passed by Democrats. You need Republicans to do it, right? If you want women's right to vote, for example, in Australia, it was conservatives that voted for that, not the left that voted for that. In fact, they opposed it. So what I actually said to some of my friends is what Donald Trump should do is see whether Joe Biden will step aside. And if he does, and Kamala Harris is bypassed, Donald Trump should ask Kamala Harris to be his VP. I know that sounds ridiculous, and I know that that's never going to happen, but it would just be such a spanner in the works. So although that could happen in your country, that's something that could not happen in ours. The other thing that's very interesting to note for you guys in America is it's not possible in Australia for the executive branch to be a different branch of government to the House and to the Senate. So in Australia and most other Western countries that follow the Westminster system, the political party that has the most representatives in the House of Representatives forms government, and the leader of that party becomes the Prime Minister and can be removed by the party. But you guys are a republic, so you have a different system. And I think that makes your system much more complicated to understand for the rest of us. So often the rest of us look at your system and go, what are you guys doing? And runoffs, which I want to ask you about, Dave, runoffs is a perfect example of that. We have a system called preferential voting, which you guys would most relate to being an instant runoff, whereas you guys actually have runoffs. Because I don't know, I'm genuinely asking you this question. Let's just say, for example, that RFK took 25% of the vote, which meant that neither Donald Trump or Joe Biden got an outright majority. Would that then result in a federal runoff? What happens in your system in that case?
Well, first, we do, several of our states have something called ranked choice voting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Where in effect you rank your preferences, and which basically comes up with the same thing that you're talking about on a weight. That's how it works, and it doesn't require a majority; it just requires a plurality. Okay. In the case of our presidential system, you have to get 270 electoral votes. You have to get a majority of the electoral votes, which are allocated by state. It has nothing to do with the popular vote nationwide. It's the popular vote within each state. And all but 2 states award all of the electoral votes for the state to whoever wins the popular vote within the state. The 2 exceptions are Maine and Nebraska. In the case of Maine and Nebraska, whoever wins the state gets 2 electoral votes, 2 senators. And then each congressional district, whoever wins each congressional district gets 1 electoral vote for winning that congressional district. Okay. Some people want to move to popular vote. That's not going to happen. The biggest difference between us is that we have 3 separate and equal branches of government.
It's just that way.
Yeah.
It's that way, to be fair.
Yeah.
But I guess my question to you though is, let's just say that Donald Trump and Joe Biden both got 250 electoral votes, and Joe Biden and RFK got the rest, what would happen?
I'm going next.
Yeah.
Nobody gets 270 electoral votes. The presidential race goes into the House.
Right.
The vice presidential race goes into the Senate. It's 1 state, 1 vote.
Yeah.
As you know, in California has 10% of the population. They have 10% of the members of the House, but they only get 1 vote. Okay. Rhode Island, which is the smallest state, gets 1 vote, the same as California. Okay. That's part of the issue of, trying to balance federal versus state. Now, let me come back to your initial question. John McCain, when he was the Republican nominee for president in 2008, wanted to pick Joe Lieberman,
Right.
who was an independent Democrat, for his running mate.
Yes.
They were very close friends. They were both in the center, and I think they would have made a great ticket.
Mm-hmm.
But the Republican establishment would not let him do that. And then he picked Sarah Palin, which was a terrible mistake, but we won't talk about that right now. No Labels wanted to run a unity ticket. The unity ticket means that the person who was the presidential candidate and vice president couldn't have the same political affiliation. Could have been Democrat, Republican, could have been Republican, Democrat, or could have been an independent, right? But they couldn't have the same political affiliation. And they wanted to run an issue-oriented, solutions-based campaign based on the Common Sense Agenda, which is on the No Labels website, nolabels.org. But under the current system, it's highly unlikely that you would see a unity ticket, because the delegates to the respective conventions would probably not accept somebody from the other. And then you got to ask yourself, what's going to happen if the Democrats dump Biden? And they're not going to dump him. He would have to voluntarily agree not to seek re-election. They're not going to dump him. He'd have to agree that.
Well, it's not clear even if he releases delegates, it's not clear that he could in some states have his replacement on the ballot.
3 states that you have that issue, as I understand it, and 2 of them are swing states. So that's
exactly
okay.
Yeah.
That's a problem. But I don't think Harris would be the nominee. We can debate about who it might be. But Rick, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, you left out the final step is that if a House votes with each state, one vote, if under its current composition, they give it to Trump because there are more Republican states in the House than Dems.
Yeah, that's right. But we don't know what the result. It's going to be the new Congress that's going to vote, not
Right.
the current Congress. So we don't know what that's going to be.
Also, RFK will likely carry 0 states. He's going to get about 9% of the vote, maybe. Ross Perot got 19% of the vote in 92, didn't carry any states. I think the last candidate, third-party candidate to carry any states was George Wallace back in 68 or 72.
Correct. That's correct. All right. And
I'd just like to make a quick comment if I can. Dave, I've made some jokes with you in the past where I said, hey, if Henry Kissinger can be the Secretary of State, I want you to promise me that if you ever become the president, which you absolutely should be the president, I want to be the Secretary of State. Now, I look at you, we don't agree on everything, especially inheritance tax, but I know that you are a dedicated and patriotic person for your country. What I'd like to ask you is this. When we look at politics in our countries, and I hope that you'll agree with me on this, there are political people whose ideas and policies I can't stand, but I don't hate them. We don't have the nastiness. It's just you have a view for the future of Australia that I don't agree with. Do you think it's possible for America to come back to, the Nixon JFK days where, hey, we don't agree with each other? Is it possible to take some of the venom and the hatred and the anger out of your politics, or is it just too far gone? Because when we watch you guys all over the world, I've got friends all over Europe, we watch you guys and just say, why? Why do you guys fight to this degree? Why can't you just disagree without tearing each other to pieces? Do you want to say something, Joel?
Yeah, look, and by the way, ours isn't perfect, but I mean, you guys, sometimes when I cover my weekly show and I have to leave the American news to the end because it's like it's something out of a movie. And, if I start it with the start, no one will stay for the rest of the news pertaining to Australia.
Well, first, it really depends upon our top leaders. Okay. The truth is, go back to Reagan. My first presidential appointment was Reagan. And when Reagan was president, the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate, but yet they worked together to try to get things done. My second presidential appointment was Bush 41. He was able to get some things done on a bipartisan basis. My third was Clinton, who's a Democrat. He was able to work with a Republican House to get welfare reform and to get some things done. Since then, things have become more and more polarized. Presidents generally have not viewed, have not worked as much on a bipartisan basis. But I'll tell you one of the complicating factors: the margins for presidential elections, the margins in the Senate, the margins in the House are so close. And the difference between winning and losing, the stakes are so high that I think one of the things that's happened is every election is about control. And therefore that has exacerbated the tensions and the tendency for people to, take the win-lose philosophy and you're either with us or you're against us. And that's why No Labels helped to form the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is 60 members, half Democrat, half Republican, that try to work together to get things done. But in the end, if you don't have the right tone from the top, it ain't going to happen. And if the margins are so close that every election is about control, that exacerbates the problem.
Dave is right. The last presidential candidate to win more than 53% of the popular vote was the first George Bush in 1988. The last landslide candidate was second-term Reagan 40 years ago.
Jacoby had a question.
Jacoby?
I was just going to agree with Dave on, and also I think one of the things that we forget to answer Shaq's question about how far gone we've gotten, and this is a problem that I think, Dave, as you pointed out, yeah, up under Bush we worked together, up under Clinton we worked together, up under Reagan, even up under Carter, and so on and so forth. I think the problem is the one that we didn't really want to talk about was during the during when McCain picked Palin and Palin started expressing some views that even McCain disagreed with. I think that's really where the problem and the exacerbating of the hatred and the I'm against you and it wasn't just from Palin. I'm just saying that became a megaphone for a lot of people who really started all that hatred. And I really admired John McCain for when he stood up that one debate and said, look, okay, no, but it's okay if he was, because that's where we were and that's where we should have stayed. But that pressure from Palin and then the social media boom came about, then the news media became all about money, and then that hatred became our centerpiece for not only making money, and that took us down a bad path. Hence the reason where we are now with, even Donald Trump, all of his crazy stuff when he says some hatred things, when Marjorie Taylor Greene gets on TV and says some bad things, when people get Jamal Bowman, who just lost his election, people are getting tired of it, but that is still what's selling in the news media. And that is where our eyeballs turn. Just as Joey pointed out, he saves it to the end because it is like a movie. It's like a movie here too. And that is what's dividing and keeping us split, is all that hatred. And yeah, people are just getting tired of it.
Three major reasons. Anonymous social media trolling makes it easier to be a mean mofo. 2, ton of money in anger. Fox News makes $1.5 billion a year. And freaking the sportification of politics, where you root for your side. It's fun, in sports, Yankees versus Mets, you guys stink. But is when you root for your team over anything else, you can be nasty.
Hey, David, I got a quick question for you, and it's actually based on what Rick just said, because as one that had a family member that was in a runoff and all along those lines and everything, my question is, have we got to the point where people are not willing to admit when they have been defeated? Because I know when my mom ran for Secretary of State, and the current Secretary of State who's been in that office for now almost 2 decades and everything, yeah, she forced the runoff and then she lost the runoff. But mom literally stepped down and said, to the woman, and I'm trying to think of her name right now and everything, you won and everything, and all along those lines, and just did not really push it past that first runoff. And she admitted that she had taken that defeat and everything. But I sometimes wonder if our candidates are so embedded that they won't even admit defeat, and that's on both sides and everything. Because like you said, my mom
but it's not on both sides.
Literally,
it's not on both sides.
Said, look, you beat me. You beat me fair and square.
There's an asymmetry where the Democrats lean back and say, oh, we're going to, accept the election results and people are going to love us for being, like that. And then the Republicans lean in and say, we're not going to accept anything. So, that's not every race, but that's a general theme.
Let's go back.
Come on, Rick. Give it up. Give it up. We have watched around the world.
Shaquille, I got to jump in. First, let's go back to 2020, okay, which is where it was the most vitriolic with regard to the election results in 2020. I'll give you my opinion. Biden won. There were irregularities in the election, but not enough to make a difference on the outcome.
Yeah.
For example, in Pennsylvania, they followed procedures that were against the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania. That's an example, all right? But there weren't enough irregularities to change the outcome, all right, which is the most important thing. Secondly, I think there's one other thing that has caused more vitriol between the parties, and that is, it used to be that when Congress came to town, they would bring their families to town too. and families would get to know each other, and members would get to know each other. And when you know each other, you treat each other with a certain degree of respect. Now, if you look at the congressional schedule, Congress is basically a part-time job.
Mm-hmm.
They're in town they're in town 3 days a week, and they're not doing nearly as much with regard to town hall meetings and other interaction with their constituents when they go back. And even when they're in town, they're spending a lot of their time raising money. But the bottom line is that, you know, they don't know each other that well. And then the leadership actively discourages fraternizing with the other side of the aisle. In fact, the people in the Problem Solvers Caucus get heat because they're actually working with people on the other side of the aisle. So that's what I'm saying. It's got to change from top down.
Hey, just really quickly.
Hang on, I was next.
Viewers around the
Okay.
world, and we will see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David
Where's
M.
next
Walker.
time, Shaquille?
Yeah, we got to go. Bye-bye.